Millhaven was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else. Nestled between rolling hills and sprawling forests, it was a quiet place where life moved slowly. The town's biggest excitement came from the annual fair or a new diner opening on Main Street. But that tranquility was shattered the day the grinning stranger appeared. The first sighting was by Margaret Turner, an elderly widow who swore she'd seen a man in a black suit standing under the streetlight outside her home. "He didn't move," she told her neighbor the next day. "Just stood there, staring at my window with that horrible grin." Her neighbor laughed it off, chalking it up to Margaret's overactive imagination. But within days, others began reporting similar encounters. The figure was always the same, tall and gaunt, dressed impeccably in a black suit with a tie that seemed almost too tight. His face bore a grotesque grin, stretched wide and unnatural, as if someone had carved it into his skin. His eyes, cold and lifeless, never blinked. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there, staring. At first, the townsfolk dismissed the sightings as an elaborate prank. Teenagers looking for a thrill, perhaps, or an eccentric drifter passing through. But then people began disappearing. It started with the town's mechanic, James Keller, who failed to show up for work one morning. His wife found their home empty, his tools untouched, his truck parked in the driveway. The only clue was the front door, left wide open. Over the next week, 3 more residents vanished without a trace. Panic spread like wildfire. Parents kept their children indoors, businesses closed early, and the streets of Millhaven emptied before dusk. The grinning stranger, it seemed, was always nearby when someone disappeared. He was seen standing on street corners, outside homes, and even in the schoolyard. His presence was silent but suffocating, a dark cloud over the town. Claire Morgan, a high school English teacher, first heard about the grinning stranger from her students. They whispered about him in hushed tones, sharing stories of friends who had seen him. Claire dismissed their tales as typical teenage gossip, until one of her students, Sarah Whitman, failed to show up for class. Sarah was one of Claire's brightest students, a shy girl with a passion for literature. When Claire called her home, there was no answer. Concerned, she drove to the Whitman residence, only to find the house eerily quiet. The front door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. Inside, the air felt heavy, the silence oppressive. Sarah's parents were gone, too. The only sign of life was a single open book on the kitchen table, its pages fluttering as if caught by an unseen wind. Claire's unease turned to dread when she spotted him. The grinning stranger stood at the edge of the Whitmans' yard, motionless. His grin seemed wider than in the description she'd heard, his hollow eyes fixed on her. For a moment, she was paralyzed, unable to look away. Then came the whispers. They weren't words, exactly. More like fragments of thought, raw and invasive. They pierced her mind, dredging up memories she had buried long ago. The death of her younger brother, the guilt she carried for not being there, the doubt she harbored about her ability to protect her students. The whispers grew louder, suffocating her until she stumbled backward, breaking eye contact. When she looked again, he was gone. That night, Claire couldn't sleep. The whispers echoed in her mind, blending with the memories she had fought so hard to suppress. She began researching the grinning stranger, poring over old newspapers and online forums. What she found chilled her to the bone. The grinning stranger wasn't new to Millhaven. He had appeared in other towns, dating back over a century. In each instance, the pattern was the same. Sightings of a man in a black suit, followed by a series of disappearances. The towns were left in shambles, their residents consumed by fear and paranoia. In every case, the stranger vanished without a trace, leaving behind no evidence of his presence. Claire's obsession with the grinning stranger deepened as more of her students disappeared. She noticed the pattern. The stranger seemed to target those with deep fears or regrets, preying on their vulnerabilities. He wasn't just a passive observer. He was a catalyst, amplifying the darkness within his victims until it consumed them. One evening, Claire received a message on her answering machine. The voice was distorted, crackling with static, but she recognized it as Sarah's. "He's coming for you," the voice whispered. "Don't let him in." The call sent shivers down her spine. Claire began fortifying her home, locking every door and window, drawing the curtains tight. She kept a flashlight and a kitchen knife by her bedside, though she doubted they would be of any use. The grinning stranger wasn't human, at least, not entirely. Over the following days, Claire's paranoia grew. She saw the stranger everywhere, in the reflection of a shop window, standing in the distance at the park, even in the hallway outside her classroom. She began to question her sanity, unsure if the sightings were real or hallucinations brought on by fear. One night, as a thunderstorm raged outside, Claire heard a knock at her door. Her heart raced as she approached, clutching the knife tightly. Peering through the peephole, she saw nothing but darkness. The knocking continued, louder and more insistent. Summoning her courage, she flung the door open, only to find the grinning stranger standing there, his face inches from hers. Before she could react, he raised a hand and pointed past her, into the house. Claire turned and saw shadows pooling in the corners of her living room, coalescing into shapes that writhed and pulsed. The whispers returned, louder than ever, filling her mind with unbearable noise. She dropped the knife, clutching her head as the world spun around her. In that moment, Claire understood the truth. The grinning stranger wasn't the source of the darkness, he was its herald, a warning of what was to come. The shadows weren't his creation, they were the manifestation of Millhaven's collective fear and regret, drawn to the surface by his presence. With her last ounce of strength, Claire focused on the whispers, sifting through the noise until she found a single coherent thought. Confront him! Claire turned back to the stranger, meeting his unblinking gaze. The whispers grew deafening, but she held her ground, refusing to look away. Slowly, the grin on his face began to falter, his features contorting into something resembling pain. The shadows recoiled, retreating into the corners of the room. The stranger's form flickered, his edges blurring as if he were a projection. For the first time, he spoke, his voice hollow and distant. You cannot escape what lies within. With that, he vanished, leaving Claire alone in the silent, stormlit house. The disappearances in Millhaven stopped after that night. The grinning stranger was never seen again, though his presence lingered in the minds of those who had encountered him. Claire continued teaching, but she was forever changed. She knew that the darkness the stranger had revealed wasn't unique to Millhaven. It was a part of every human soul, waiting for the right moment to surface. Years later, Claire would write a book about her experiences, titled The Grinning Stranger. It became a bestseller, though many dismissed it as fiction. But Claire knew the truth. On quiet nights, when the wind howled through the trees and the shadows seemed to move on their own, she could still feel his gaze, and the faint echo of a grin.